If God is real, then why wouldn't he just tell us? Why wouldn't he send a clear, direct message?
He did. He did. He sent his son, and there was a whole biblical canon. But I see the question you're asking.
Yeah. He comes down into this Riverside chat and says, yeah, I'm real.
Boys, chill. It's a good question. Like, why isn't he more actively and physically involved in our life? If you're a father, right, and you've got a child, do you want them to learn lessons through trial and error and through falling back and getting back up again? Or do you want to be like helicopter over them all the time, being like, do this, do that, do that? No, I wouldn't. I'd want them to go out and be able to learn their own lessons, because I know that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end for them. I know that the beginning is the beginning of life when they're a toddler and they have to learn certain lessons. And there's the middle part where they might have a family of their own. And then there's an end for them. And that you have to learn lessons in life to be able to complete the story and to have a successful story. If I am like arrogant enough to think of myself as God for a second, would I want to be helicoptering over my creation? Or would I have the wisdom to understand that there is a story here and that these people have to learn these lessons themselves and that the arc of history is there for a reason?
Jake, Julius, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Egan. I appreciate it, mate. It's good to connect.
So take me into the context of starting Rattlesnake TV and how that all came about.
Yeah, well, you and I were just talking off air for a little bit about COVID and about how we both sort of went against the grain. And then I guess it ignited something in both of us. Previously to that, I was kind of involved in politics and the realm of ideas and all these sorts of things, but never really thought that I'd take it as a career, because before I was doing podcasts about AFL footy and about martial arts and boxing and these sorts of things. But I kind of thought that there was a bit of a ceiling with that. There's only really so far that you can take it. So then I got into the realm of politics a little bit more. I'd been doing podcasting for like 6 years before that, and I'd never earned really a cent off it. Definitely spent a lot more than I ever made on it, and never had any videos get more than about 100 views. And then eventually started Rattlesnake TV. And then after a little while, had a few videos that sort of did well, and then just put my nose to the grindstone, and here we are.
What do you think, like from a psychological lens, why do you think people resonate so much with the political content?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I think people have always resonated with political content of various different forms, but it just has sort of changed over the years, because what you used to see was the very sort of mainstream media takes, and everybody would turn on their TV at night time and there'd be the news anchors that everybody would listen to and everybody would get their information from. And it was rather easy. And I guess the world was a little bit more unified back then. But nowadays it's just changed a lot, because information is a lot more decentralized these days. We have obviously social media, YouTube, the exact thing that we're doing right now. And people are able to have a voice and have a much more diverse range of opinions that are out there and places to go for information. So I think people have always resonated with that, because they're obviously wanting to be aware and educated about the things around them, and these things affect them. But specifically with my sort of content and with the realm that I exist in, which is like dissident political media, I think it's just purely because people are seeing that a lot of the shit that they've been told throughout their entire life has been a lie. A lot of the narratives that we've been fed have been a lie. You were talking to me about holistic health things off camera just before, and I think that that's a perfect example of it. Like, people don't know anything about how to actually be healthy. We're just told to jam pills down our throat and to freaking take every single vaccine that's ever waved in front of you, and eat breakfast and stuff. And that's for pussies, man.
How's your journey been like that, with once the veil gets sort of lifted beneath your eyes around the realities of the world? What was that sort of awakening period like?
I would say that it was a gradual process, because I used to be more of an atheist liberal back in the day, or like liberal in Australia is a bit of a sort of loaded term, I guess. But I used to be an atheist leftist back in the day. And it was because I was just a moron, basically. I didn't understand anything about anything. I didn't know what I was talking about. I had no idea about basic logic or basic philosophy. I had no idea how the world worked. I was just young and stupid. So I used to be an atheist liberal and used to think I was smart, but I wasn't. And then slowly, as I started, when the COVID thing happened, that kind of red pilled me a little bit. And I started to realize that there are some things here that are actually genuinely evil. And then I had to look into the metaphysical concept of evil. What is evil? If there is evil, is there good? Or are these things just figments of our imagination? So it's a bit of a deeper philosophical conversation. But and then after that, I started to look into Christianity a little bit. and that started to broaden my perspective, started to look into conservatism, became more of a centrist libertarian after a little while. And then I got into debating. And once you get into debating, then you really have to follow the logic to its conclusion if you're good faith about it. And now I'm a right wing extremist.
Is Christianity at the foundation of your philosophies and how you see the world now?
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. It's it's like the foundation of my worldview.
Mm.
Everything comes from there. All truth, logic, metaphysics, epistemology, everything comes from Christianity.
Okay. Now, I'm super interested to hear your perspective on how you came to the certainty of that being your worldview, because I've been doing a deep dive into this recently, and I looked into thought experiments like Pascal's wager and like this idea around what the intellectualization of religion and faith and what it actually means. So, take me into your process of logic and how you became certain of Christianity as your worldview.
Well, it's a good question. It's a deep question. Um, First of all, you have to look at what we would call the transcendental categories. Okay. So, this is, in my opinion, it's the strongest argument that there is for Christianity. And basically, it's called the transcendental argument. And basically, to summarize it in a way that people can understand, is that we have all of these different categories that we sort of grant ourselves if we don't really look into this, like logic, like mathematics, like metaphysics. Metaphysics just being basically like the study of things that aren't physical, right? Um, the intangible things. And then epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. What is knowledge? How do we know what we know? And these sorts of things. If you think about it, all of these things that we're talking about here, including logic and maths, they have to be objective, because if they're not objective just means not mind dependent. So objective means that it exists outside of ourselves, outside of our minds, right? Because if mathematics is subjective, then it would be such that I could change mathematics, right? And that I could uh, create different mathematical formulas that would get me to space, and that's just not the case. And so, if you think that things are objective, and I do believe that these things are objective, then it would sort of suggest that this was created by a mind that exists outside of human beings. Does that make sense?
Sort of, yeah. I was reading like yesterday, I think it was Aquinas, five of his like proofs for the existence of God, and it was using like like the regression of cause and effect. And it was, I think it was relating to one of your examples you're just alluding to there about that as well. Um, because for the average person and how they perceive their reality, how can they comprehend what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, with the regressive argument, that would suggest that everything that we understand has a cause and effect, right? So you can trace it back, and then if the atheists sort of materialists, which just means that everything is material, there's nothing that's abstract, like really metaphysical, they would suggest that this all comes from a source, which is a big bang, but they can't account for where the big bang comes from. So then they're caught in what's called an infinite regress. What created that? What created that? What created that? And so the logic of that demonstrates that there has to be something that's eternal. There has to be something that's timeless, spaceless, immaterial. And that's what we would attribute to God, which is a mind. God isn't a dude who's in the sky sitting on a cloud, sort of like waving his finger at you whenever you're like doing something naughty. God is a mind and a creator of the universe, and God is timeless, and God is eternal. And that's, to be honest, as far as we know with logic, we can look at what's called the impossibility of the contrary. And the impossibility of the contrary is that the infinite regress that you were talking about just then, that the atheists would believe in, that's actually impossible because of that infinite regress. So the impossibility of the contrary would suggest that there has to be some sort of a mind that is God.
And what accounts for such diversity in the what God actually is? Obviously, there's tons of different religions. So, what accounts for that diversity?
Well, um, it depends which way you look at it, but you can look at all of the different religions and you can trace them back, and you can sort of have an accounting for how all of them came to be in a way. So the Christian idea is the following. Jesus Christ came to earth as God incarnate, essentially, to come and obviously do all the things that he did, die for our sins, those sorts of things. Before Jesus Christ came to earth, basically there was just pagan religions. And if you look, this is like the truth of what the world was like before Jesus Christ and the Christians took over the Roman Empire. There was a bunch of different pagan religions scattered throughout the world, and the Christian idea of this is that those were all essentially demon influenced. And I know it sounds crazy, like, oh, they're all just demon influenced except for Christianity. But have you ever been to have you ever done like a deep dive into, for example, like the Aztecs and the Hindus and the Buddhists and all of these types of religions?
Enlighten me.
So, for example, when I was in Indonesia this year, like there was this day that they have where everybody goes silent for a day or two. And what they do is they build up big effigies or big statues of demons and of monsters, and they cart them around the city. And then at the end, they burn them all. And that's the idea, is that you're getting rid of the demonic spirits. The Aztecs, for example, they were worshipping sun gods, and they were bringing people up to the top of pyramids and cutting their hearts out to sacrifice it to the sun god and throwing them down, sacrificing virgins. Just very demonic practices, basically all round. And then when Christianity came to be in the Roman Empire, for example, like just as one example, the idea that you couldn't rape your slaves in the Roman Empire was absurd. And the Christians came about with this sort of sexual ethic that says you can't rape your slaves. Before that, the Romans had like the same word for urinate and ejaculate. It's just like they just used the slaves for those reasons. And so Christianity came about and it introduced a whole new moral and ethical system that completely changed the course of history. And then the Christians went about and evangelized in these different places. All of the apostles, Jesus's apostles, except for one, were brutally murdered. Um, and then eventually in the third century, Constantine was converted to Christianity, and then Rome started to become more Christian. Then you've got the Byzantine Empire, which is in the eastern part of Europe, and then the Western European Roman Empire. It's a long history, but all of those civilizations that we see now, Germany, France, Sweden, they're all like Christian influenced civilizations. England as well, and then from England comes Australia and America. They colonized the Latin parts of the world with Christianity, and now that's a very Catholic part of the world, and they're not pagans anymore. So, I mean, I've gone on a bit of a tangent, but it's just sort of understanding the historical trajectory of how Christianity has formed the world that we live in.
So how do we ensure that what's being written is actually an accurate capturing of history? Like that's playing devil's advocate. That seems to be the biggest concern for me, is like how we can just put our trust on our worldview on something that happened thousands of years ago that seems like a bit of a leap.
Well, I mean, what do you mean? Do you mean like in terms of the fact that Jesus Christ that he lived at all, or
Well,
where do
yeah,
you want to
like where
start?
does the validity of that premise come from? Like on whose account? I know it's written on the accounts of the apostles, etc. But then how can we? It seems like we're putting a lot of trust in thousands of years of the writings of it to be the basis for something that should be so important. It seems like we're putting a lot of trust in something that's hard to verify.
Yeah, well, I mean, like first of all, the fact that Jesus lived, there's no doubt about that whatsoever.
Why is that?
And Jesus,
Well,
well, it's in order to, if you wanted to say that Jesus didn't live, then you would also have to say that Napoleon didn't live, and that Alexander the Great didn't live, and Genghis Khan. I mean, it's the most recorded person in human history, from not just sources within his circle, but also lots of outside sources as well.
who writes these things that get passed on in history? Like, because we know that history gets manipulated by whoever is maybe the winner of history, right? Who's like, where is this evidence being stored, and who's writing this stuff?
Well, historians. So there were historians at the time. You've got, like, first of all, his disciples, and then you've got people like Josephus, who are more external sources, and then lots of people within the Roman Empire. And then you've got like people throughout history who have developed these texts and everything. So the idea that Jesus didn't exist is such a fringe idea that basically nobody worth their salt would ever even entertain that as a legitimate theory.
Okay, it's just interesting because I think it's obviously quite foundational to the beliefs. I'm just skeptical because I feel like it's nearly impossible to even trust like the mainstream narrative that's being pushed right now, and it feels like I would be that's why I push on it, because it's super interesting that a lot of the people who believe in Christianity, they're putting a lot of faith in something that happened thousands of years ago, but there's a reluctancy to trust what they've been told about what happened 50 years ago. So it just seems like there's an inconsistency of trust being applied, and that's where I'm just curious as to how someone can find work through these paradoxes.
Yeah, well, I mean, like for example, what when you say what we've been told 50 years ago, like a lot of these things are really open to a lot of interpretation. Like for example, like the Vietnam War is that happened about 50 years ago. People can say, well, was it a good thing? Was it a bad? Was it a moral evil? Was there some sort of a necessity for the Vietnam War to happen? And you can quibble about all of these sort of things, and that's fair enough. But the idea that Jesus Christ existed and that Christianity completely changed the course of human history, that's not something that's really necessarily up for debate. I mean, if you could debate it if you want to, but it would be so fringe that and such a wild theory. Is that what you're getting at in terms of the historicity of Christianity versus what we've learned in the last 50 years?
Yeah, I just feel like if we're putting all cards on the table, I just find it super interesting to why I go to right to the root of like, why does someone believe what they believe, right? And it's like a lot of the, let's say for example, the Christian worldview is based on these historical accounts, and I'm finding it hard to grasp how there can be such trust put in something that's thousands of years ago, and then we know that there's an unreliable narrative that's pushed about events that happen, let's say during World War II, for example, which is much more recent. So it's like, how do we know what to actually trust?
Well, it kind of depends what you're asking though, because the actual, like I said before, the historicity of whether or not Jesus existed is one thing, but then you have to talk about the biblical canon as well. How do we know that that hasn't been altered over time? That's another question. And then you want to talk about, like for example, what the meaning of Christianity is. How do we know that that hasn't been altered over time? And there's so much historical context there. Like Christianity isn't exactly a monolith in today's society. We've got lots of different churches. We've got the Catholic Church, we've got the Orthodox Church, we've got the Protestant churches, and they all kind of believe different things. Like foundationally, they believe like similar things, but they all believe pretty different things at the same time. So I don't know, like which way did you want to go with it?
I guess mine's from more of a psychological lens of like, if Christianity is someone's worldview and they're using that to inform their decisions, it just seems like to me there's like this inconsistency. Like, I get that I totally get what you're saying around how Christianity, the origins of that, it's not up for debate. But then I'm just like, okay, well, everything else is. Then why is there such rigidity around those historical accounts?
Right. Well, it's it's kind of hard to address the question because the historical accounts are one thing, but then there's also the truth, like the meta truths about what Christianity is, what Christianity means, how it's impacted the world. So, just in terms of what we were talking about before, like all of the things that we know and love, for example, all of the institutions, they all come from like a Christian heritage. All of the beautiful architecture that we know in these places like Europe and everything, that's all from a Christian heritage. I mean, things like human rights themselves, they come from Christian societies, and you really can't find these things anywhere where Christianity hasn't had a big effect. So effects on society, pretty drastic. And even things like in the modern day, for example, one of the biggest problems we have is birth rates. As societies become more secular and more atheist, the birth rates start to decline dramatically. And that's because they don't have that sort of religious foundation that you kind of need in order to sustain society. So there are many modern day effects, there are many historical effects. Um it's had drastic effects everywhere.
No, I think it's a good way to look at it, the influence of Christianity and using that as like a guiding point. I just find a lot of people are sort of relatively either atheist or agnostic because of how Christianity is applied and interpreted. And it's talking about things that happened thousands of years ago.
What do you
To
mean applied and interpreted?
Well, like people are saying like, oh, because Jesus died for our sins, therefore this action or this is wrong, this action or what's happening in the world So people are like using this thing, and I'm like, it's sort of that's why I feel like there's such a lot of people that I meet don't resonate with faith and religion because they don't want to. It's something that's happened thousands of years ago. They struggle to connect the dots.
I,
That
I get what you're saying. Do you believe that there is right and wrong?
intuitively, yes, right? Like, you can apply many practical examples, and I can. There's like this moral intuition of like that is right, this is wrong, sort of thing.
What do you think that is?
I could argue many things, right? Like I could argue, that's God expressing His will of right and wrong through me, or I could say, it's my primal part of my psychology to be accepted into into the into the herd, and I'm doing what is best for everyone there. Like I could argue for many different lens, right? What do you think?
Well, I think that, like we were talking about before, we were talking about the difference between objective and subjective, right? So the atheist has to essentially fall on the sword that all morality and good and bad is just subjective. It just comes down to your preferences. They actually can't create an objective justification for this. Even though guys like Sam Harris, for example, who wrote the book The Moral Landscape, he'll try and argue for it, but essentially it doesn't really make sense because if it is the case, right, that the world was created from the Big Bang, and then the Big Bang expanded out endlessly, and then eventually the flux and chaos of the universe created Earth, and then we were little tadpoles in the ocean, then we were fish, and then the fish eventually became philosophers. If that is the case, then there actually, when you really think about it, there is no objective good and evil because, like we said, objective has to be mind independent, right? Everything just has to be our subjective, what I think is right and what you think is right. And then what justification do I have to tell you that you're wrong if everything is just subjective?
Mm.
I don't really have any justification to tell you that. Ultimately, I don't, because like there is no objective truth, right? So I think what you're hinting at there when you talk about intuition is something along the lines of what the Christians would describe as like a moral law being written on our hearts, right? And I would actually argue as well that it's very difficult to conceptualize a world where we don't have love, for example, and where we don't have kindness and we don't like sort of have some sort of like an affinity towards our neighbor and the desire to want to procreate, for example. It's very difficult to imagine a world where those things don't exist. And to me, that would kind of allude to there being a moral law. Like otherwise, everything is just comes down to preferences and everything comes down to basically what the herd says is right. So if the majority of people tomorrow were to say, you know what, I think we should bring back slavery and we should start enslaving Africans again, like what actually would be the argument against that?
They're probably the moral argument, right? Like intuitively, this is the wrong thing to do. Like no, the human rights.
But that's all just arbitrary. So
Yeah, exactly.
you
That's what
say
I mean.
the
Where does
moral
that come
into
from? Yeah.
but it's like it's your moral intuition versus my moral intuition. So but we think that it is right. So we have the force, we have the guns, so we're going to tell you that it's right. But
Hmm.
but what actually is the justification for us to say, no, 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 that is objectively wrong. Even if there's one me standing against 99 other people, and I'm saying, hey, listen, no, I don't want you to jam this thing in my arm because I think that I have agency and I think that this is dangerous and I can make that decision for myself. And they're all saying, no, 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 you're an idiot. We can't leave our house because of you. Like what? How can I actually justify that what I'm saying is right compared to those people?
Well, what's the atheist argument for that? What are strong believers in atheism say around this?
Well, the strongest believers, Richard Dawkins, Alex O'Connor, some of the most intelligent ones, Sam Harris, they eventually have to bite the bullet that there is no such thing as good and evil. Like there's a really famous quote from Richard Dawkins. I'll try and pull it up for you actually.
Yeah.
Dawkins quote, no good and evil. So, uh, Richard Dawkins' quote is the following. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. No evil, no good, just blind, pitiless indifference. That's Richard Dawkins, one of the foremost atheists in the entire world. Now, sure, you could make a scientific argument for that. If you say, look, we don't actually have any observable. Like I can't see God, right? So if I'm a pure empiricist and I need to put everything under a microscope that I believe, then we can't see God. So I'm going to say that this is the best theory that we've got, this Big Bang. We don't know otherwise. So therefore, everything is just the product of cosmic chaos. And at the bottom, there is no good and no evil. But I think that we can actually intuit, and the argument from intuition isn't a good argument. But I think that at the bottom level, we can intuit that the idea that there is no good and evil is kind of absurd.
Yeah, I can agree with that. But then how come there's so much resistance to believe in a God if the evidence is quite strong? Like what you're putting forward is quite compelling, but then why is there so much resistance to believe that there is a God?
Well, I think that we just live in a very materialistic society, to be honest. Like, think about how distracted we are. I mean, this is like kind of a little bit of a weird example to use, but just think about how distracted we are all the time. Our dopamine receptors are constantly being fried. Like we're always on our phones, we're always on social media. We never really have time in the modern day and age to really sit there in silence or in any real meaningful way and ponder deeper questions. And I think that that is one reason, especially in the modern day, if we're talking specifically about the modern day, why people are not sort of open to that idea. Because, you know, the misconception about Christianity is that you embrace the Christian worldview or you embrace the Christian faith, and all of a sudden everything's great and it's all, sunshine and rainbows and you feel fantastic and you've got a guardian angel and God's going to look out for you. That is not the case, man. Like, it is a very, very difficult and at times disturbing thing to realize, because Christianity doesn't necessarily gaslight you about the evils and the ills of the world. However, if you look at a lot of the more new age movements, they will gaslight you about that. And they'll say, hey, man, it's all just about, like, we got to hold each other's hands and, everything will be fine. And they use all of the nice things from all the different religions, like a buffet breakfast, and they put it on their plate. And it's just like, yeah, just sort of everyone just love is love, man. And that's just not the case, man, because we have to contend with the depraved nature of the world and like the evil that actually does exist in the world. So yeah.
Mm. Do you think we can? Because I've been wrestling with this idea of like, because I'm quite a scientific mind, but I truly believe there is something greater in this world, right? Like I would put myself quite on the agnostic fence, but like I truly believe there's something, right? But my scientific mind like loves to have evidence, but I feel like I don't want to. I feel like there's this resistance to intellectualize my way to believing in something because, like, Pascal's wage, a prime example. Like, you can see how there is benefits to believing in it, and I don't want to just intellectualize my way there. So, how would you advise someone, maybe on an agnostic lens, to think about this tension between the intellectualization of faith and can you use logic to get your way there, or is that counterintuitive to the faith of what God is trying to preach to us?
Oh man, you can absolutely. I've never had any sort of crazy spiritual experiences or anything. Like, I found my way to believing in God purely through logic and
Mm.
nothing else. A lot of it was through watching debates and everything, but in order for there to be logic, I do believe that there has to be a precondition for logic, right? So when we talk about logic, we generally look back to the genius ancient Greek philosophers, for example, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. And Aristotle has his three laws of logic, right? It's the law of non contradiction, the law of excluded middle, and the law of identity. Those are the three main laws of logic that there are. And so if I look at the law of identity, for example, it's like A has to be A can't be A and B, right? So you can't have like Egan can't be Jake, Jake can't be Egan.
Mm.
That's just pretty basic logic. But the way that the atheist would look at it has to be that all of this sort of springs from some sort of a big bang and some sort of a cosmic chaos. And the law of non contradiction as well, for example. Like, you can't contradict your like a statement. I can't say Egan is ugly handsome. Like, that wouldn't make sense. So, but in order to have all of these objective laws, there needs to be a precondition for those laws. For example, in order to have mathematics, 1 + 1 is 2. Like, if you and I didn't exist, right? Or if no human beings existed, Would 1 plus 1 still be 2?
I feel like 1 plus 1 would still equal 2, but like it only sort of makes sense given.
That we observe it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right. I get what you mean. So if a tree falls in the forest, did it fall?
That's man, I couldn't answer it because I spin my head about that.
But it's an interesting thought experiment, right? So if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to witness it, did the tree fall?
Yeah, it's like Schrodinger's cat sort of thing. It's
Yeah, it did fall, right? And it's just like if we're not around to observe 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 1 is still 2, and then we can come and create an equation because of that. So all of these different categories that we can observe would would insinuate that there has to be a precondition for that.
what is that? Can you reframe that somehow so I can understand what you mean by precondition? Like I sort of get what you're alluding to, but how could we think about that differently?
So all of these different like categories that we're talking about here, in order for them to be objective, right? In order for these things to actually exist, there has to be some sort of a condition that actually puts this in motion, right? So
Yeah.
maybe a better example of this would be if I look at my computer, right? If I look at my computer, I know that there's somebody made the computer. If I look at a car, I know that somebody made the car. And then if you look at DNA and if you look at biology and all these sorts of things, why do we write off that whole concept because then it comes to some sort of a conclusion that there has to be a mind or there has to be a mechanism that created life itself.
Mm.
Because the atheists will tend to argue, well, the brain is some sort of like a mechanism and it fires here and here, and then I move my arm like this. But like, why is it that we actually just completely discount the fact that this whole mechanism that we can observe in this whole universe that we can observe is not created? Like that just seems on its face absurd to me, that it just sort of happened like that. Like that is, to me, that's completely illogical. The only thing is we haven't spoken to the guy in the way that we would normally speak, like you and I are speaking right now. We haven't spoken to the creator and we haven't seen the creator.
I got a I got a question then, and I think this is one that atheists use. If God is real, then why wouldn't He impose? Why wouldn't He just tell us? Why wouldn't He send a clear, direct message and just?
He did. He did send. He sent his son, and there was a whole biblical canon. But I see the question you're
Yeah,
asking.
yeah. Like he could just pop down. Yeah, he comes down into this riverside chat and says, "Yeah, I'm real." Like,
Yeah, boys, chill. No, I see what you mean, and it's a good question. Like, why isn't he more actively and
mm,
physically involved in our life? But um, like, if you're a father, right, and you've got a child, do you want them to learn lessons through trial and error and through falling back and getting back up again? Or do you want to be like helicopter over them all the time, being like, do this, do this, do that, do that? No, I wouldn't. I'd want them to go out and be able to learn their own lessons because I know that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end for them. I know that the beginning is the beginning of life when they're a toddler and they have to learn certain lessons. Then there's the middle part where they might have a family of their own. And then there's an end for them. And that you have to learn lessons in life to be able to complete the story,
mm,
right? And to have a successful story. So when I think about it, if I am like arrogant enough to think of myself as God for a second, would I want to be helicoptering over my creation, or would there be like would I have the wisdom to understand that there is a story here and that these people have to, you know, learn these lessons themselves and that the arc of history is there for a reason?
yeah. No, I totally understand that. That's a good answer. Then another one. Then why would I believe your God versus the? I know it comes back to what you were saying before from the other gods, but there's so many gods, right?
Mm.
Like, what makes the certainty of your God over all the other gods?
Well, first of all, you have to look at the historical evidence. So, for example, when you look at Buddha and Buddhism, Buddha was a man. I mean, there's a spiritual element to Buddhism, but Buddha was just he was a man, and it's a very sort of materialistic ideology as well, because it's about Buddhism is essentially about like transcending the material world and sort of renouncing all of your physical possessions, and then eventually reaching this place of nirvana where you have spiritual enlightenment. It's also very self-serving when you think about it, because it's about me, 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 me. Me reaching my nirvana, being sort of transcending all of the material world, where Christianity very much projects outwards. But anyway, and then you look at Muhammad and the Islamic religion, and Muhammad is also just a man. There's no like divine element to Muhammad. He's just a guy. And then the Islamic religion came out of that. And then the Hindus are all basically just like mythical. There is no sort of human element to Hinduism whatsoever. They're just like mythical gods, right? But then Jesus Christ actually he had a life. People know about the life. And then have you ever done any research into like the actual historical claims about Jesus?
Oh, I've probably heard them in a few podcasts. What are some of the main ones you're referring to?
So it's really interesting when you look into it, because there is a historical record about the life of Jesus, and then particularly about his resurrection, where there's just heaps of evidence from around there that he rose from the dead, and that he went and performed all these miracles. There's thousands of accounts of him performing miracles from various historians at the time. There's thousands of accounts of him rising from the dead and visiting to people at the time and everything. So I would say that if you look at a lot of the historicity of the claims that are made about Jesus and all of the historical records, there actually is pretty solid
Mm.
evidence that he performed divine acts. And look, to it, I can understand to an atheist that that's crazy. Like they actually think that this dude came, walked on water, rose from the dead, and it's like, yeah.
So with that one there, like I've seen the argument being put forth. Like I don't know if you referred to it. I heard it in another podcast with Alex O'Connor, but it was saying to do with like did did the belief in God heal the person, or did God heal the person, or
Did the belief in
or
God
Jesus? Like
heal the person,
you know what
or
I mean? Like if someone's if you know this, there was a story. I don't know the exact one. You might pick up on it. I think this lady was like bleeding out, or saying she was like, "I need Jesus to heal me," and Jesus came and touched her
the
and
woman
healed.
at the well? Yeah.
Yeah, and then so it's like, is it the belief?
Oh no, 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 I know the story when they're on the trail and then she's sick. Well, it's an interesting question, because you know when you look at one of the stories in the Bible, for example, where Jesus' disciple is on the water and Jesus says, "Come to me," and the disciple starts walking and then he falls into the water and he says, "Jesus, Jesus, help me." The idea there is that the disciple lost faith, and that's why he fell into the water, because he doesn't have the faith. So then there is this notion of like, well, if the disciple can do that just through faith alone, then what is actually not possible with the right amount of faith? If like if you've got like the staunchest faith in the whole world, like
Mm,
what actually might you be capable of? So I really don't know, man. It's a good question.
yeah. I've heard you combat this argument before, but I think it'll be worth doing. Is the one about like if God's all loving, then why would He, you know, give kids cancer? Why would people be put through such suffering?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, it it just makes sense that there's a lot of suffering in the world, because how could we know what good is, or how could we know what happiness is, or how could we know any of that if there's
No
no
contrast. Yeah.
suffering? Yeah, that wouldn't make sense to me logically, that suffering wouldn't exist. But there's story of Job in the Bible, right? And the idea here is that Job was a very, very faithful servant to God, and he was as good as they get, like a really, really stand up dude. And then he lost his sons, and then he lost all of his crops, and his friends betrayed him, and he had all these terrible things happen to him. And he stayed faithful, stayed faithful, stayed faithful. And at the end, he sort of reaches the end of his tether and he says, "God, like, you got to tell me what's going on here, man. Like, I have been the best servant to you that you can possibly imagine." And then God essentially says to him, "Listen, you're not in control here. I am. Like, how do you presume to know what the plan is? You know, like if this bad thing happens, how do you know that if this person gets in a tragic accident and they lose their legs, for example, then they won't go on to become a motivational speaker and help a million people and save a bunch of people from suicide and save a bunch of marriages from breaking up? Like, how do you actually know the ripple effects of the world to suggest that suffering is essentially like not for a greater cause?"
I guess in the grand scheme of it, right? You can sort of argue for how an isolated event can be extrapolated out over time and serve this greater purpose, but then the individuals suffering that, like I know I hear Alex O'Connor talked to this, but it wouldn't provide much solace to the grieving family, right? Who has to when their kid dies. That this. I'm sorry, you had to go through this tragic event. It's going to serve the world, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, it might not. It might if they have faith, but it might not provide them with any comfort at the time. But we're all going to go through suffering, man. Like that's just a part of life.
Mm,
Everybody's gonna suffer, and some people are gonna suffer way worse than others. But I think oftentimes it's like people kind of just know that it's the really like treacherous times in life that kind of make you as a person. So you can look at something like bone cancer in children, for example. Like, what the fuck, man? Like, how do you get something so terrible? Like, how's that even allowed to happen? But then you scale it back a little bit, and you're like, you have a really bad illness, but then you get over it, and you were depressed for a little while, but then it sort of makes you into the person that you are today. And then you might break your arm, and you broke your arm, but then you were bedridden for 6 weeks, but then you read some amazing books, and it sort of changed your perspective on life, and you appreciated your arm so much more after. So you scale back the suffering, and oftentimes, like suffering is some of the things that we're most grateful for in life. Like sometimes when I look back at my life, I'm like, that was a terrible time, but I'm so glad that I went through it because it made me the man I am today. And everybody kind of has those stories. So to say that suffering is an inherently bad thing, I think is a bit of a stretch.
Like, I feel like some people would be able to grasp the concept of how suffering can lead to growth and can serve a greater role. But I think, yeah, it's difficult for some people in those situations to, yeah, someone might not experience in this lifetime the life of their dreams, and
Yeah.
that's what I think a lot of resistance for people.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is the sort of foremost question that gets wrestled with. And pretty much all of the great Christians, philosophers, and thinkers throughout history have wrestled with these ideas, man. And it's something that we will continue to wrestle with. We don't know the full scope of things. Like if you think about what God is in terms of like a timeless, spaceless, immaterial mind who created the world, like the amount of knowledge that I could acquire from this whole entire life, if I just put my absolute all into it, it would be like this little cup of water compared to God, which is which is a million oceans. Do you know what I
Mm,
mean? So for us to sit here and have the sort of arrogance to think that we can know all of the answers to everything that's out there and to all of the, and to the greater plan is it's completely impossible. And that's sort of where the idea of faith comes in.
mm. How do you think people are misapplying or misinterpreting, I guess, Christianity or religion in their own lives? Like, what do you think's being mixed up in the waters now with the social media?
Um, as in how Christianity is viewed in modern culture.
Yeah, how it's viewed in modern culture and maybe misapplied, misinterpreted.
Right. As in from Christians or from people who aren't believers in Christianity?
I guess you could do both, right? Like people who maybe misperceive what it is, but then also people
Yeah.
who believe in it but maybe misapplying it.
Right. I'd say okay. I would say that one of the big misconceptions is that Christianity is somehow like oppressive or tyrannical. That's not the case whatsoever. They think it's kind of a funny argument actually that people say, "Well, you're trying to impose your morals on everybody. You're trying to impose your worldview on everybody." And it's like you're doing the exact same thing. Like just you merely telling me not to impose my worldview on you is you imposing your worldview on me. So that's one thing. People say, "Oh, it's this tyrannical. It's like exceptionally tyrannical or authoritarian or whatever." And I would actually say that it's like the greatest form of freedom that you can possibly have, because the idea of God, right, is that God is something, or is God is all loving and good, right? So the idea with Orthodox Christianity is that the purpose of life is to participate in the energies of God. So it sounds like a bit of a mystical thing, but Orthodox Christianity is actually quite mystical in that sense. So the energies of God would be humility and kindness and charity and love and all of these highest ideals and virtues that Christianity promotes. So to participate in those energies would be to move as close towards the example of Christ as possible. So to move as close towards those virtues as you can, and to try and embody those virtues as much as you possibly can. Now, um, if I try and embody materialism, for example, as much as I possibly can, I'm going to miss out on a lot of shit. like, sorry, the rejection of materialism, I'm going to miss out on a lot of shit because, I might be able to go and scam a bunch of people and then get myself a nice, beautiful watch and a Bugatti. I might get some hot chicks on a boat in Dubai. I'm going to miss out on a lot of stuff. And if you tell me that I have to reject all of those sorts of things, I would think that like you're trying to oppress me in a way. Or if you say controlling lust, for example, that's another one. Like we're all men, we all struggle with this shit. I do just as much as the next guy. That might seem oppressive to me in the moment because I can't act on my desires. But this is one thing that we all kind of intuitively know again is that sacrifice the in the short term is always going to lead to massive benefits in the long term. So if I can, you know, get control of those emotions and those feelings that I've got and actually harness my masculine energy in the pursuit of a family, for example, or in the pursuit of helping out my community instead of in the pursuit of going and like picking up chicks, then ultimately I'd say that that's going to be liberating because I'm not like bound by the shackles of my fleeting emotions and desires all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Something I've been grappling with as well, and I was talking to a friend about this around how people use God or spirituality, right? Like when something good happens in their lives, they give credit to God, and when something bad is happening, they say whatever's meant to be is meant to be. God has his own will. Now, is that a way to outsource responsibility because we don't want to be the ones in control because that's a confronting thing? Like, how would you find the nuance in that? Because it could easily seem from the outside like someone doesn't want the pressure and responsibility, so they give it over to God because they don't want to be responsible for life because it's stressful. So whatever God wants for me, then I'll endure it.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question because I think that whichever way you look at it, that can't be a bad thing. Because what's actually the point of being really super neurotic all the time about all of the different nuances of life? Like, what is the point of me being really stressed all the time about my finances, or really sort of super stressed all the time about my relationships? And if bad things happen to me, I'm just sort of like cursing the sky about it. Even if you didn't believe in God and you looked at it from a purely like a utilitarian standpoint, which is like the utility of what I'm actually doing, what's the positive utility? I'd say that that would be a good thing still. If you could sort of have faith in something that you know is, or that you think even, or that you're just going to grant yourself is, loving and benevolent and kind that's outside of yourself. Like one of the things that I often think about in this regard is like we are born into this world, right? And we're on a big rock, apparently, in the middle of space. And we have to learn all of these things about life and about human connection and everything. And we have to be a toddler and then go through school. And then eventually we have to um, have a career and all these types of things and manage relationships. And we have to make good decisions in the near that will benefit us in the future. And like we're going to be sick at some point, we're going to watch other people get sick, we're going to watch other people die, we're going to die at some point. Like all of these things are deeply deeply like traumatizing to think about, and we have to be in control all of that as individuals. I mean it really is a lot. And I think I might have heard you on one of your podcasts, on one of your shorts, talking about Camus and the myth of Sisyphus.
Mm.
Yeah. So the idea that Camus was trying to get across in the myth of Sisyphus is like the essential of the crux of the book is, why don't people kill themselves? That's actually a really good question.
Hmm.
Why don't they just kill themselves? Because if everything is ultimately meaningless, that's the idea of nihilism, right?
Hmm.
That everything's ultimately meaningless, that there is no really good or evil, and basically we just are going to live this fleeting existence, and then we're going to become worm food one day, and then in the heat death of the universe, nothing really matters. That's the idea of the myth of Sisyphus. Why, when facing that and the inevitability of suffering, would I choose to do that when it's meaningless? And it's a really good question, man, especially from the materialist point of view. And I do think that this is why we have a massive epidemic of suicide these days. It's because if you don't have some sort of a greater meaning, or if you don't have um, that the understanding that what you do is not meaningless, then nihilism creeps in.
I find a lot of people who go through like intense suffering, and I've interviewed a lot of people, right, and they go through this like personal transformation. They might not explicitly reference God, but they always reference like themselves wanting to give back to other people, or a version of themselves who was in those situations. Would would the undercurrent of that be God?
Well, I think that it's like the virtue that you're talking about there is self-sacrifice, right? So one of the great virtues of Christianity is self-sacrifice. Like you think about what Christ did on the cross. It's not just people will sort of they'll like caricature that whole aspect of Christianity, and they'll be like, "Oh, some dude came in. They're just like, why did he have to get nailed to a cross and die?" And it's like, no, it's a lot deeper than that, because what that is was the ultimate act of masculine self-sacrifice. Because not only did he get uh, killed on a cross. He was betrayed by all of his friends, and he was tortured. And they let a horrible man, Barbarous, go in his place. And then all of his friends had to watch him. His mother had to watch him die. It's like the worst death that you can possibly imagine. But the idea here is that that was completely self-sacrificial. So obviously, that's a really strong Christian virtue that people have. And like I said before, I think that this is something that's sort of written on our hearts, because when somebody lives a life of pure hedonism, and how often do we see this? Somebody lives a life of pure hedonism where they're just like, I want to just basically sex, drugs, and rock and roll until the end, baby. I'm just going to go out in a cloud of smoke. It's going to be good times and great classic hits until the end. Those people pretty much ubiquitously end up miserable. Like, would you agree with that?
Yeah.
But if you can, like, I think that the perfect idea of masculinity is the harnessing of your masculine virtue in the service of others, in outwards projection and outwards service, in self sacrifice. And all of the happiest and best and most well adjusted men I know have a very good grasp of that concept, whether they're religious or not. They're family men. They're men of their community. They're people who help out the youth. They're people who stand for really important causes and these sorts of things, because it's self-sacrificial. It's one of the most important things ever, and I think that nothing will get you there like rock bottom, man.
I feel like spirituality and God can also be wrongly applied to our own personal lives, because we can stay within our comfort zone as well. Like how would you if someone is thinking about, their own spirituality and God, like how does someone know if they're not just using these spiritual words and language to limit themselves?
What do you mean by limit themselves?
Like when someone has like a job, right? Like for example, I've witnessed this. Someone has a job, and then like, after going through a bit of a journey, and then they say like, "I was born to do this." Like, how does someone know that that is what their end goal is meant to be? And if that's not just because it's at the precipice of their comfort zone, and now they're using maybe their belief in God to stop themselves from going a little bit further, making more of an impact, taking more risks.
It's actually it's kind of hard to say, man. It's kind of hard to say. I guess it would really come down to the individual, because you see a lot of these platitudes that you're talking about happen within this sort of more spiritual sense, right? But there's a parable of the talents in the Bible, which is where one guy is given 10 talents, and then another guy is given 5 talents or something along these lines, and then another guy is given 1 talent. And God says, "Go out and make use of the talents." They come back, and the guy who has 10 talents has used all of his talents amazingly, fantastic. He's done amazing work. And so God gives him another 10 talents. And then the guy who has 5, same thing, God gives him more talents. The guy who has 1 talent comes and gives God back the talent and says, "Here, I buried this, and I'm giving it back to you now." And God says, "You unfaithful servant," basically just rips into this guy and goes, "You took the talent that I gave you and you did not apply it properly." And the idea of the parable of the talents is that we are called upon to use our God-given talents to make the most of our lives, right? So the idea that people would limit themselves and not push further and not use their talents is not really something that's and like you look, the guy who had 10 talents, he might have been a janitor, but he might have been really good at these 10 different things that he was doing, and he's just right where he needs to be. But he's utilizing his talents to the best of his ability. The guy who had 1 talent might be a billionaire because he's just so damn good at making money, if that makes sense. But
Mm.
the idea of not using your talents is not something that's a part of Christianity.
Well, how would someone in the moment listen to God and what He's trying to teach us and the lessons He's trying to give us? How would we know we're taking aligned action?
Well, for me, I'm not a Christian apologist, by the way. So these questions can be like a little bit. So I have to think about them for a bit.
What's the difference? What do you mean by that?
A Christian apologist is somebody who's like a theologian who's trained and studied in Christianity and who understands everything really well. But um, I'm okay, but I'm still kind of a novice because I haven't been a Christian for as long. But and I haven't studied to the extent that some of the guys I listen to have studied. But for me, and this is kind of a good segue to that, is that I sort of trust in church authority, for example. So you've got your different denominations. Christianity started as Orthodox Christianity, right? And then in 1054, there was what you call the Great Schism, which is when the Roman Empire and the Eastern Byzantine Empire split, right? So you have the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western Roman Catholic Church. So the Eastern Orthodox, they don't believe in the Pope. And then you've got the Protestant Reformation, which happened in the 16th century sometime, where Martin Luther nailed his thesis to the wall and then he got excommunicated. He started his own church called the Lutheran Church. So basically, the Protestant movement then spread around Western Europe, and then Australia is a very Protestant country. England, the Church of England, is a Protestant church. All of like the Pentecostals and the Lutherans and all these churches are all. So if you ever walk into a church and they're wearing plain clothes, you're in a Protestant church. But if you walk into a church and there's the priest, the Catholic in his robes and everything, and it's a proper like Latin mass, you're in a Catholic church. And then the Eastern Orthodox is kind of similar. The priests wear the long black garments and everything. But all this to say that in Eastern Orthodoxy, they believe in what's called apostolic succession, which means that from the time of Jesus until the time of now, you had Jesus' apostles who then passed the baton down, and then all of the church fathers over time. And then you have councils throughout the history of Christianity. The Council of Nicaea in the 3rd century, they came up with this like with the different dogmas, the things you'd call dogmas, beliefs about Christianity. So these sort of ideas have been developed and crafted over like 2,000 years to really, and where theologians and philosophers would really try and understand Christianity to the best of its ability. So if I've ever got a real question like about Christianity, I'm not necessarily going to just go and pray about it because I'm probably not well versed enough or not on that level to really get a great answer. Oftentimes I'll have to go and seek out church authority.
Yeah, okay. Because I think a lot of people who I know that believe in God, like a lot of this, the I don't know, the language around God and spirituality is used, and it's interesting about like why we use that language and if we're actually accurately applying the teachings, or it's not a way to soothe our discomfort. Like I know a lot of people want to be empowered to change their lives to the best of their ability, but they don't. But then it's that sort of understanding of like, are we applying the right information?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, um, look, man, I really do believe that the spiritual world is very real, and that we are in somewhat of a spiritual battle at all times. And it's a battle between metaphysical concepts of good and evil and everything. And we can deduce basic truths and basic goods. And I think that you and I would both agree that it's wrong. It's wrong to basically like, you know, fiddle a child or something like that. Like that's wrong. And then you can deduce all sorts of truths. But then there are people who really go against these sorts of truths. And I believe that at the core of Christianity, you have the answer to pretty much all of these questions. And if you look deep enough into it, and if you study it hard enough, and if you really go to the sources to address any sort of moral or philosophical questions that you have, then you'll get an answer.
What do you think's in contrast with the teachings of Christianity? What do you think is wrong in the world today? Then,
In contrast, I would say abortion is something that is an absolute abomination that is just one of the absolute worst. I'm talking more about the Western world here because obviously the Eastern world and the Middle East and everything is just a completely different kettle of fish. But abortion is probably one of the big ones. Things like LGBTQ, pride parades, all these sorts of things. Again, transgenderism, the idea that one is sort of rejecting their body and their internal state. I would say a lot of the things around like greed and corruption as well. Uh, just the persecution of the church itself, man. I mean, there are heaps.
what do you think about the transgender stuff? I heard you speak on the other podcast a lot about it.
Well, Um, First of all, I'd say that it's like people, from my point of view, people are all made in the image of God, and like you are, there's a reason why you are made as Egan. You know, you've got various different talents and things to provide to the world, and the idea that you would reject something as fundamental as your sex is just a complete and utter affront to you as a person. And then, taking it to more of the sort of scientific level, there's actually just no evidence whatsoever that transgenderism is anything but a state of mind. So that's another thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So what do you think have you seen a common pattern in these people? What causes them to identify as transgender?
There's heaps of things that cause them to identify. It's hard to actually put it down to one thing. I would say that it's hard to sort of pinpoint it like this, but oftentimes it comes down to some sort of like a trauma that happened when you were a child, but then it can be other things as well. I think that porn is something that leads people towards being transgender a lot, actually, and it's kind of crazy when you look into it because we all know about the sort of the trap that porn can put you in when you're watching too much of it and then you want more extreme stuff, more extreme stuff, more extreme stuff. And how there are various serial killers like Ted Bundy who have blamed this on why he did what he did. And so with the trans stuff, a lot of guys will get into a pattern where they've been online terminally for so long that they'll start watching more and more hardcore stuff and then get into the trans stuff. And there are actually subcultures of online porn consumption where it's going to sound fucked up, but where they have this sort of ASMR that is going on that convinces people to be trans and convinces people, first of all, to start like wearing a dress around and wearing panties around and this sort of thing. And if you look into the guys who made the movie The Matrix, they're both transgender and they both blame this exact phenomenon on why they became trans. And if you think about how many kids there are out there these days that are terminally online and that are watching heaps of porn and everything, it kind of starts to make sense. Now, that would obviously be a smaller part of it. I also think that social conditioning is another big thing. The fact that you've got it's so glorified these days that if you are an outcast, like there's massive links between autism and transgenderism. Like if you are some sort of a social outcast or whatever, and if you think about it, you can either sort of be exactly what you are and try and deal with the hand that you're dealt, or if you go over to this community over here, they'll say, "Hey, no, you're not the way you are because of any sort of malfunction or any sort of defect that you've got, or you're totally perfect the way you are. In fact, you are. If you become this thing, then you'll be celebrated and you'll be a hero. You won't be an outcast anymore. You'll be a victim and a hero. You know." So there are a lot of different things, man. Like we could take it many different ways.
Why do you think there's so much resistance to speak out against these? I feel like there's a lot of people who hold very conservative views, but are almost so scared and feel like they're censored to speak their truth.
Because they get like we experienced a whole generation of cancel culture where anytime people would express the truth about these sorts of things, they would be fired from their job and they would be socially ostracized and they'd be called a fucking monster. So that's probably a big reason.
How do you think it's going to play out then?
Well, there's a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance to it now. Um, I think the whole argument has been truly and utterly destroyed online. Like I've done a bunch of debates about this. Like I debated a guy twice actually on the phenomenon of gender pronouns. And he was like a science guy and intellectual and all these sorts of things. And he was trying to walk me through the studies about how really there's a trans brain. And I just dog walked this guy for 2 hours in this debate because um, essentially he was making the argument, and this is the argument that a lot of them have made before they've just been really badly beaten in debates online, and high profile debates as well. He was making the argument to me that there is some sort of a trans brain and that there have been these studies done and they've shown that these men who transition to becoming women or vice versa, they have this trans brain. It's this phenomena. And, it's actually a biological thing. So then I asked him the follow up question. Well, okay, just say me, Jake. They do a brain scan on me and I've got the trans brain, but I say I'm a man, but I say I'm not trans. Am I trans? And he says, well, no, you're not. And okay, well then it's just a feeling. That's all it comes down to is just a feeling. So people don't really respond very well to completely bogus things like saying that we must affirm when somebody has to be called Zimzer or whatever it is. Like
Mm,
society kind of just steps back and goes, hold on a second. I mean, maybe I can deal with that myself and maybe I can sort of traverse the world and keep my job and sort of act politely to people and not sort of step on any landmines. But you start putting it in the schools and you start teaching this shit to kids, which is happening all around
mm.
Australia. It's crazy how many stories there are coming out around Australia. There was like 2 that I saw just this week that were significant stories. You start doing that shit and then you awaken the mama bears. You don't want to awaken the mama bears because they'll bite you.
Who are the mama bears?
The mama bears are the women who send their kids to school and who look over their curriculum and everything, and then they realize that, hold on a second, why are they telling little Timmy that he can be a girl if he wants? And then they get activated because mothers are very, very protective of their cubs, man. Like mothers are very, very protective of their children, and obviously fathers are too, but just in kind of different ways, I guess.
What do you think's been the brainwashing that we've overlooked that's maybe coming to the fore now with that?
Well, well, I would say that it's a deeply spiritual thing in the sense that some of the ideas that Christianity, for example, would posit would be that there are objective truth, goodness, and beauty, right? That beauty is something that's objective, and that truth and the goodness are things that are objective. Now, if I wanted to destroy that, and if I wanted to cause havoc and chaos, well, the first thing I would do would be to destroy those 3 pillars as well as I possibly could.
Mm.
So I would try and destroy the truth. And this is what the postmodernists do, for example. They say, well, guys, we're at the end of history. We've realized that there is no universal truths and everything is basically just your own interpretation. So if I slap shit on a wall, that's art. If I build a big circle square, that's a beautiful bit of architecture. If I transgender, then who are you to tell me that I can't? And this sort of thing. And I would say that these sorts of ideas are like a very slow erosion of truth, goodness, and beauty that's done intentionally in order to subvert Christianity. Essentially, at the end of the day.
And I think a big thing you're seeing in Australia is like I guess across the world is the feminization of men.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's happening absolutely everywhere, man. Um, yeah, I mean, feminism is like feminism is the original sin in this regard. In terms of the feminization of culture and men. I mean, if you just think about it for a second, feminism has allowed women to infiltrate every single institution that was previously masculine. So if you get the feminization, it's just logically you think about it, right? You get the feminization of the police force and of the education system, of the psychological, like the medical institutions and higher education, and the feminization of absolutely everything. It's going to feminize things.
And why is that a bad thing?
Well, do you think that the feminization of men is a good or a bad thing?
Yes, men, but I'm talking about opportunities for women. Like, what's the difference? We might be talking about two different things, but I mean, like, obviously, I believe the feminization of men has had some very bad outcomes for men and society. But I mean, like, women having new roles and opportunities as a result of like the feminism and that movement.
What do I think is wrong with women having Look, I would say you can call it opportunities. I don't see them as like any of these positive opportunities. All I see it as is just brainwashing, basically, and that women have completely gone away from their natural instincts. And the natural instinct of a woman is to be a mother and to be a carer and these sorts of things. And sure, they can have plenty of interests and everything on the side, but the idea that a woman is meant to be a provider and a protector and these sorts of things, and is meant to that they're meant to be running society and to be politicians and everything is completely contrary to their nature. Like
Mm.
women just don't go well in those regards. Like they're not good politicians in terms of business. Like like feminine traits don't predict good market success. For example, where they're terrible police officers. Um, they'll like completely demoralize if you're a fireman and you're at the what's it called where they all the firemen hang out, and then there's chicks that come along. You can imagine the brotherhood would be soured because then every time you make a heinous joke, you got to be like, oh, didn't mean it, that's bad. Like women are not physically capable enough to be good police officers, to be in the army. Like it's just the facts are the facts, man.
Is that what we're scared to talk about? Is these facts and truths?
Yeah, yeah. Like, but if you think about it, right, it's not like they don't have a point. These feminists and these women, but it is very detrimental to society. So when I say that it's not like that they don't have a point, if you are the weaker sex, right? And this is played out throughout history that women tend to influence in different ways than men. And the way that they generally tend to influence is by influencing men because they can't actually exert force. That's impossible for them to do. So they tend to exert influence through manipulation and through influencing men in various different ways. If you are the weaker sex like that, and you sort of think to yourself, well, these guys are like fucking animals. Like they can really do whatever they want to us at any time, and we really don't have any recourse. Maybe we should appeal to some of these men over here to give us more institutional power so that we can like move the levers a little bit more and we can sort of protect ourselves against these beasts, you know? That's essentially the idea of feminism. They kind of in a sense they collectively woke up and they took the female red pill. You ever seen the movie The Matrix?
Many times.
You know, the red pill is like you get awoken to the reality of society. Well, that is the reality of society, is that men have all of the force and that women can't collectively rise up and overthrow the patriarchy as it is. So when you look at it from that perspective, like if you were a woman in the 1920s or whatever, and you had that chance to sort of be like collectively rise up and be like, okay, listen, we need to get ourselves more power and everything so that we're not at the behest of these men. Like, would you do it?
What do you think was like when all I keep hearing about from the feminist perspective is the mistreatment and the suffering that women went throughout the course of history, how they were abused and not given opportunities, etc. So how are we not going to be replicating that society again, where there's like a power dynamic?
Well, there's always going to be a power dynamic. That's just the descriptive nature of the world. Men will always have a monopoly on force, and in order for women to have any sort of power whatsoever, they have to appeal to men. They have to appeal to men to men for their rights. They have to appeal to men for basically everything. Because if they don't have that, then they
Mm.
they can't have any of those things that they like. So that's just the descriptive reality of the world, right? Now, is it true that in some ways women suffered in the past? Yeah, absolutely, it's true. I mean, they were the war brides, you know, spoils of war, but men suffered like way more throughout history. If you think about any time throughout history, the men would go off to battle and they'd get killed. The women would at least survive. Even if you look at the pre-agriculture or like after the agricultural revolution, pre-industrial revolution, it's like 95% of people in these countries were all farmers. And the man would go out all day and break his back plowing the fields before any steel plows were ever invented. And the woman would stay home, tend to the children, make sure the children don't die because, you know, the infant mortality rate was so high back then. Like life was just suffering. Men were dying at war, and then women were tending to the home. The idea that of opportunities and of voting rights is kind of a new thing, man. Like if you look at the actual rates of voting rights, they were pretty even. Like males got suffrage, and then generally it was a few decades later that women got suffrage. Sometimes it was at the same time that universal suffrage was granted to men and women. So the idea that they've been the victims throughout history is just a crock of shit.
Mm. So what about this term patriarchy that gets thrown around every day?
Well, the patriarchy is a descriptive truth. The patriarchy is not something that is like a something that was created um, by mean dudes. The patriarchy, like I said before, so the idea here is force doctrine, right? That's the argument coined by my friend who sort of describes this, right? So force doctrine is the idea that men have a monopoly on force, and that women are only granted their rights because they have to appeal to men for those rights. That's a descriptive truth. It's sort of the similar when you look at geopolitics, for example. The only reason why we don't go and blow up smaller nations and just loot all of their shit is because of benevolence, essentially. But we could if we wanted to. So they have to kind of appeal to us for survival. So that's the idea of force doctrine. What was the question again?
The question was around patriarchy and the term that's being thrown around.
Right, that's right. So, so this is why patriarchy is a descriptive truth, because patriarchy just essentially means that society is run by men and male institutions. Like men are at the top of are at the top of institutions, and they essentially run society. This is always going to be true because women will always have to appeal to men for their rights, because you have to have a military, you have to have a police arm, you have to have manufacturing, you have to have all of these things that require men, and women just aren't capable of actually doing it. So the idea of patriarchy is something that's always going to be true, even in this more feminist society we live in. Like men still run society, and they always will.
No, people who hold your view will get thrown, like, get cancelled, basically, right?
They can try.
Yeah, so how would you
Yeah.
combat that? Like, let's say someone has your beliefs, right? I think a lot of people I know hold pretty much similar beliefs about society and how they view, but they're very reserved and quiet about it because maybe they don't know how to use logic or they don't have a deep understanding of the history. So, how would you advise someone in a situation like that where they have this intuitive knowing that what's happening in society is wrong, but they don't feel empowered to stand their ground or say do something?
Well, I mean, it depends on which. It depends, man, because I really don't really recommend it for a lot of people, if I'm honest. Um, this is something that I chose for myself, and it comes at a severe price. Now, if my mate from back in the day comes to me, he's like, "Hey, man, I'm working my job in IT, and these people at my work, they won't shut up about this freaking about race politics and DEI at work." I would probably advise him to just sort of keep your mouth shut, because you don't want to really go out on a flaming sword and then be ostracized from your career and everything. It's a really big risk to take, but if you really, really sort of stand for it, then you have to sort of put measures in place to make sure that your life's not going to come falling apart around you. If you've got kids and everything, you can't just sort of, oh, I'm going to stand on my principles, and then my kids are going to go hungry. Like that's not a good option. So what I would say is that definitely an economy rising of uh, people who just completely reject all of this bullshit. So definitely try and work for one of those said companies, whatever industry you're in. I'm sure there will be some person out there who owns a business who has a similar sort of shared value set to you. But then otherwise, I would say, if you really want to go into it, you have to just know your shit. You have to learn about basic logic, and you have to learn a little bit about history and everything. Like with the feminism argument, for example, one of the biggest problems that we mentioned before was the birth rate argument. And the idea there is that if we don't go above replacement rate, which is 2.2 or 2.1 children per woman, then our population is just going to decline until it drastically declines, like what is happening in South Korea and Japan. Like, have you seen any of the stats around this?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty mental, man. Like Japan and South Korea are basically not going to be a Japan and South Korea in about 100 years or so because of their demographic decline.
But isn't this
And
all part of the obviously the depopulation agenda that they have, right? Like they're from a pragmatic standpoint, right? They're squeezing the economy. I think 80% of couples, both of them work. Um, like there's such a difficulty to have that provider then stay at home and look after the family dynamic that was replicated throughout the course of history. Like there is people pulling strings to make this incredibly difficult to do.
yeah, totally. And feminism is one of the original sins in this regard, because you just look at it in a really basic way. It's like if a woman is going to delay having children, because they obviously people used to get married and have kids younger back in the day. So if a woman is going to offset having children for a career, and if all she gets told on social media and in the media all day is "You go, girl, you're so powerful, you can have it all," and you can just basically be a hoe in your throughout your 20s, and then when you're 35 you'll click your finger and Prince Charming will come along, and don't settle for any less. It's a terrible, terrible message to tell women. And now it's to the point where over 50% of people above 30 aren't going to be married and having kids, and it's only going to get worse and worse. And particularly for women, because I think that it's much easier for men to find purpose in their work as like wholesomely than a woman. Women have always found more purpose in nurturing, and they're more interested in people, and they're more interested in family, and they're more sort of interpersonal in that regard. Whereas a man, it's ideally they would want to have a family, but conceivably they can just have a career and sort of get some sort of fulfillment out of that. It's
Mm.
much, much harder for women. So if women are going to offset that and then just listen to the societal programming, well, then of course they're going to pursue careers. And if you are a woman these days in Australia, for example, and you say, "Oh, well, Sally, what's your greatest dream?" Well, my greatest dream is to be a mum and be a stay-at-home wife. Everyone's gonna like, "What is this? Sally has no ambition." But for me, that's like the best. If a woman says that, I'm like, that's like the ultimate feminine virtue is the self-sacrifice in the pursuit of family. Like, there's nothing really virtuous about having a career.
I know that's the psychological brainwashing that's, I think, occurred at large. I've witnessed that in Australia, right? Like, had someone on the other day talking about this. Like, being a mum, just a mum, is like, it's not enough now, right? Like, they have to have the
Bullshit.
business.
Yeah.
I know, like, I believe it's like the number one role, right? That mother role is super, super valuable. Um,
Just think about it, man. Like if you're a mother and you say you have 3 or 4 kids and you are raising 4 human beings who are going to go out and have an untold impact on the world. So you've had your life or your fun or whatever, and then you're in your and then you have kids and you enter into a phase of life where it's more self-sacrificial. And you're raising these little people who could go on to be astronauts and doctors and engineers and prime ministers or freaking mums. Like you could raise incredible people, or you could raise really shit people as well. So that's an unbelievable responsibility on your hands. And to raise well-adjusted, well-mannered, productive members of society, like what career could be better than that?
it's it's the individualistic nature, right, of like Western society. I think social media's had a big role in this, right? Like we're so focused on ourselves and like how to be bigger than other people. I was talking to someone the other day, super religious guy, and it was convincing me a lot around this. And talking about how we just look up to the wrong people. We look up to 25-year-old influencers who have no family, no responsibilities. Like, that's not what masculinity is. He was saying masculinity is self-sacrifice, and we've just got this twisted idea of what being a good man and what being a good woman actually looks like in reality.
Yeah, man, I would say that you know, like these influences everything like to be worshiping some sort of a 25-year-old influencer because they've got nice things is just such a vacuous thing to look at, but it's just the way that things are going. Like they did a survey of kids, I can't remember where it was, but they were asking what do you want to be when you're older, and it used to be an astronaut and now it's a YouTuber. God forbid. Like that's what the kids really want to, and I'm not saying that it's a bad career or anything to go down, but it's really not something to be idolized whatsoever. It's just a job.
Mm. No, I totally agree. I think we're both on the same page around that. I think it's quite hard, right? There's a lot of not only economic stress that people are getting put under. There's just so much noise through social media, and then there's all this like digital ID and all these things happening. People are a bit lost, and I think maybe religion, Christianity can play a really positive role in people, giving them some sense of solace or maybe a bit of a roadmap to understand the world.
Yeah, I mean, I often think about this concept of the fear of death as well. And when you think about materialism and these types of things, and you think about a lot of the societal ills that we're facing at the moment, a lot of it is very sort of selfish and just terrified of death. And look, man, like if I meet people who say they're really not scared of death, I'm like, okay, well, far out. That's you've really gotten to a pretty high spiritual level there because I'm still fucking terrified of it. But the idea here is that materialism and hoarding all of your worldly desires and pleasures and living for right now and not having any sort of greater vision for the future and for family and for future generations and everything, I think that it all kind of stems from this fear of death. And even all of the dopamine frying that we're doing at the moment,
Mm,
we're always on our phone, we're always distracting ourselves, and we're always hyper focused on things that don't really matter. It's like I think that oftentimes we're trying to shield ourselves from that mortality and from the fact that we're getting older, and that suffering is obviously just around the corner. And like it never really used to be like this. I think people in ancient generations were much more intelligent than us in this regard. They would actually sit there and they would ponder these ideas, and they would have an explanation for these things. And um, yeah, I think that we do live in a world where like it's so taboo to even talk about things like mortality, and
mm.
it's an important thing to talk about.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot more of the ancient philosophers, and I just feel like, yeah, we've become quite stupid. But I think even in myself, like I feel like I'm less coherent. The more time I apply myself into these conversations, the more reading I've done recently, podcasts, talking about it, like you actually start to see the world totally different. But a lot of us are just trapped in our own lives, and rightfully so, right? People have got bills to pay, so like totally get it. But like then I feel like we're being controlled in a game that we didn't even really sign up for. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it does make you view the world. It's like they say the more you learn, the less you know, right?
feel that.
But I would also say that the more you learn, it's like if your sphere of knowledge is this, and then you learn about this, it sort of opens up this horizon where you know less about the where before you obviously knew less, but now you know more, and it's opened up all these different horizons and all of these different rabbit trails that you can go down, and it can be quite confronting because the idea of philosophy itself, like the love of wisdom, man, like
Mm.
that's a very, very deep pursuit. And you could spend your whole entire life really analyzing one philosopher, and you could derive all sorts of intellectual pursuits from that. But all of them and all of the different religions and cultures and societies and stuff, it's like, damn, man, there's a lot to know. And the more you open your mind up to it, the more questions you'll have.
1,000%. And I feel like I've progressed a lot in only the short few months recently since I've been letting go of this identity. Like I've been willing to explore things that I'm very naive in, and it's opened up my understanding about the knowledge of the world. But it's quite confronting. Like even, like for example, today was just a prime example of, I don't have much understanding about the history of Christianity, religion, but like I feel like this is why I have a podcast, because I think a lot of people don't have knowledge and information about these things. And if I'm not asking the questions, or if people aren't asking the questions, like then what are we going to do? We're going to live by default, and we're probably not going to live a very empowered life.
Yeah, man. Well, I think it was maybe Socrates who said that something along the lines of knowledge being like the greatest adventure that you can ever go down. And I would just totally agree with that. I mean, the idea of learning is the ultimate pursuit. It's the most exciting thing that you can possibly do. And I feel really bad when I see these young people who are sort of really TikTok brained and who can't concentrate for more than 2 seconds and who don't know anything about anything. Like I was just literally before we got on this, I was watching a reel, and the guy was like to these chicks, um, "What's 34 plus 66?"
Mm.
And none of them knew, and they had heaps of time to try and figure out, and none of them knew. And they say, well, "Name 3 countries," and they can't name 3 countries. And I'm like, it's actually impressive how you've gone through life avoiding that information. Like, how do you not know that? It's fucking crazy.
It,
So I
it,
feel I feel really sorry for people like that.
it even starts now with like when people are going it through the education system, like all the participation awards, especially for like guys, like they need to learn to fail. To like, there's just such a resistance to go through adversity. Like we're like helicoptering everyone. We're putting nappies over our development. It's like we just, especially for guys, they need to go through adversity. But even in the young parts where their psychology is quite, their subconscious mind's quite absorbable, we just sugar.
Yeah, they need to go through suffering, man. Suffering is important.
Mm, yeah, 100%. What's on the horizon for you now? What's the greater mission for yourself?
Well, I would love to have a family at some point. So that's probably the career is pretty cool. Like I love my career and everything, and I'm pretty invested in it and everything. But at some point, I would definitely like to start a family, meet a nice Christian girl, and do that. But that's over the next 5 years or so. That would be the big thing that I'd be hoping to do. But in terms of career and everything, I've got. Have you heard of Amfest? Like it's Charlie Kirk's organization, TPUSA. They
Yeah, I've had
do a
that.
big three-day event at the end of every year. I think I might be doing a debate at that,
Sick.
and I've got a few more collabs that are happening in Dallas while I'm here, and might go. I'm probably going to base myself in Bali next year because it's so good for just locking in and concentrating. But yeah, man, how about yourself? What do you got coming up?
Oh, just locking into the podcast. Like I've just decided recently, like going out to 3 episodes a week, just continue to get really interesting, knowledgeable guests like yourself, and continue to go all in this thing. I mean, I obviously I work part time and I'm trying to fund this and find sponsors. It's quite difficult because like I'm finding that tension between like there's a lot of these you got to find the right companies because a lot of people are scared to invest into these sensitive issues, right? Like if I start talking about these things, like people are reluctant to put money or their brand on the line when there's such a politically correct movement. But just figuring it out.
Yeah, you got to be careful with guys like me, man. That's why I told Darcy, who introduced us, the steak lad, when he wanted to get me on his podcast. I was like, mate, I don't know if that's a good idea for you. And he was like, no, you're my mate. And I was like, Das, you sure, mate? Because you know, it's people are pretty relentless. I get multiple death threats per day. So you got to be careful. But anyway,
Is any of that like real legitimate? Like, how do you feel about that?
well, I think that it's all just basically people who are maladjusted, terminally online, like we were talking about before, who can't actually separate themselves and their emotions from politics. I kind of feel sorry for them, if I'm honest. Whenever I see it, I'm like, dude, what got you to the point where you're like messaging somebody about how you want to kill them and like all in graphic detail about how you want to kill them and stuff? It's like kind of feel bad for them. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to say. It's kind of just a sad thing, and I think
Mm.
it's a these people need help.
Yeah, social media makes it so easy to say whatever you want, right?
Yeah, totally, totally. Like you can just do it behind a wall, but I can't imagine the sort of like anguish that you would have in your own life if you just can't disconnect. Like I do this and then I try my hardest to disconnect, because politics is very consuming.
Mm.
And even if you're a viewer or an observer, people get so into it, dude, where it's just like they can't function as a normal human being in the world anymore because everything has to be political and every conversation they ever have has to be political. So I kind of like to do my thing and work and try and make an impact, but then you have to separate yourself as well and be like, all right, touch some grass as well.
Mm.
But a lot of people don't, man. They just get so deep, and I think that honestly, it's a loneliness thing as well. Because if you've got good relationships around you, and if you've got things to do and purpose, you're not trying to tell someone you want to kill them online.
100%. All right. Thanks for coming on the show, brother. I really appreciate your perspectives and I feel like I learned a lot. What would be two things? Where would we go to see more of your stuff? Obviously, Rattlesnake TV, but also what would be a couple of, if we want to learn more about the stuff that you're talking about today, what would be your top couple of places to go?
Good question. There's a guy named Jay Dyer who's a good friend of mine, and he is online. He's a little bit maybe some of the language he uses can be a little bit hard to interpret sometimes. But if you really wanted to get into these philosophical ideas about, he's just so good at explaining them and about like the evidence for Christianity and all of these different ideas of the transcendental categories and stuff. I would highly recommend you go on a big binge of his content because he's really good at it. Um, I learned through watching a lot of debates because I like to see the back and forth.
Mm.
Whenever I see an idea and someone's saying something and with conviction, I'm always like, yeah, but like there has to be counter arguments for that. So then I'll go find the counter arguments. But if you watch a debate, you can like sort of watch it in real time and you can use your own faculties to really sort of ascertain some sort of truth there. Um, but yeah, those would be some things. I'd say J Dye's channel's great, and then and watching debates.
Yeah, awesome. I'll link him in the show notes. Jake, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Egan. Thank you, man.